Well, let's meet again in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Can we do that? 2 Corinthians chapter 12. I have often said this about grief. It is a world of its own. I mean, it really is. It is a world of its own. It's something that from the outside looking in can't possibly be understood. And at the same time, from the inside looking out, it's something that can't possibly be explained. Again, it is a world of its own. Let's do a quick review of what we talked about this morning. First of all, we learned that we don't have to get over a grievous loss. As a matter of fact, we can't get over a grievous loss. And beyond that, God doesn't require us to get over it. The concept of getting over it is an empty and misleading expectation. And I explained it like this: we get over breaks and sprains. We don't get over amputations. The second thing we learned is that we can get through it. Now, that doesn't mean that we just shut the door behind us or somehow put on a set of blinders and just do our best to pretend the pain away. It doesn't work like that. And that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about getting through it. Here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that time that comes eventually. And again, that time is different for everybody. We should never try to put a timetable on grief. You just can't do that. It's not fair. Neither should we try to put parameters on the way a person grieves. Everybody grieves differently, and we have to be aware of that and be accommodating of that. But by God's grace, here's what I'm talking about. There comes a time that we come to accept the horrible event, whatever it was, that brought us so much grief and so much sorrow. And with the Lord's help, we find the strength to move forward in our life despite the loss and pain. And again, I think that you would agree with me that the Apostle Paul by God's grace, found the strength to move forward, did he not? He moved forward and planted churches and preached the gospel and wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, much of it while in bonds in prison. So Paul did get through his time of suffering, but he never got over it, because we never read in the scriptures where God ever took that thorn away from him, whatever it was. Whether it was a physical ailment, some say it was his eyes, some say it was some crippling form of whatever. We don't know. And maybe God didn't let us know because he wanted us to know that whatever it is, it doesn't make any difference. Whatever it is that we suffer, his grace is still sufficient. And so we don't have to get over it, but by God's grace we can get through it. And then we talked about this morning. God can use pain for our good and for his glory. And we shared 3 principles there with you. So let's talk about this 4th truth that will help us get over or help us get through what we'll never get over. And it's this: God is sovereign. Now listen, we should not be afraid of the doctrine of the sovereignty of God. That's who God is. It's in the book. God is sovereign. That's not a scary doctrine. Some have tried to take it and twist it and turn it and mutilate it to mean something that it doesn't mean. But to say that God is sovereign simply means this: he has the power, the wisdom, and the authority to do or allow anything he chooses with regard to his creation. Let me say that again. He has the wisdom, the power, and the authority to do or allow to be done anything He chooses with regard to His creation. That's us. And we would do well to remember tonight, we are the creation. He is the creator.
Amen.
We are the created. He is the creator. Without being irreverent, it means this: He's the boss.
Amen.
He makes the rules. He's the authority. Just like you as parents have no doubt at some time in your children's life, you've said, hey, I'm the parent. You're the child. Well, on a much larger scale, on a much grander scale, He's the parent. Amen? He's the father. We are the child. That's why. That's why. Because He's the Father. Now, practically speaking, here's what it means to say that God is sovereign. It means that He is free to do whatever He chooses to do. It means that He has the right to deal with us any way He chooses. It means that He doesn't have to treat us like He treats our neighbors. It means that He doesn't have to treat us today like He treated us yesterday. And perhaps most importantly, it means that He, and don't miss this, He is not obligated to live up to our expectations or to explain Himself.
That's right.
Why? Because He's sovereign. Now, as we look back at our text here in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul knew that at some level, this thorn in the flesh came as Satan's attack. The messenger of Satan to buffet me is how he referred to it. But I want you to note something else. He also recognized that in a larger sense, what came into his life could only be what God allowed. In the Bible study time this morning, we talked about Job. Do you remember how God put limits on what Satan could do to Job? He said, you can do whatever you want to do, but you can't take his life. And Paul understood that concept. Paul understood that the things that came into his life were things that, for some reason, God allowed to come into his life. Thus the word given, look at it, you might want to underline it or circle it there in verse 7. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, notice this, there was given to me. Satan was the agent through which God delivered this thorn in the flesh. Does that make sense? It was given him by who? By a sovereign God who has the right to do whatever He wants with His children, or to allow to happen whatever He wants in the lives of His children. And so Paul understood that this thorn in the flesh could only come to him, and only came to him, and was given to him based upon God's permission. That it wasn't just a stroke of bad luck. It wasn't just happen chance or fate. It was by divine design. Now, church, listen. The truth of God's sovereignty is probably not something that you want to share like right off the bat with someone who's grieving. Okay, this is some pretty heavy stuff right here. Okay, and I'm not pretending to know everything that there is about the doctrine of the sovereignty of God. Okay? But this is probably not something that you want to just throw at somebody right off the bat. Well, we know God's sovereign, and it's like, buddy, back up or I'm going to throat punch you. You know, like, get out of my face with that. You know, nobody wants to hear that. at the outset of suffering and grief. This is why I didn't, honestly, this is why I never touch on this point in a morning service. Because there are normally a lot of folks there who are lost, a lot of folks who don't know the Lord, a lot of folks who don't have any concept of the sovereignty of God. And the last thing I want them to do is to leave thinking that God is some bully up in the sky who picks on people. And so that's why I say this for a Sunday night crowd like you, who have a bit more, probably a bit more Bible knowledge than what a Sunday morning person, a guest or a visitor would normally have. And I never want anybody to bring a guest on a Sunday morning when I'm preaching this and then have to sit at lunch and answer a bunch of questions about this sovereignty of God thing. This is some pretty heavy stuff right here. But it's Bible. It's biblical. It's true. It is who God is. Now, having said all of that, I will say this. The sooner that we come to grips with these truths, the better. And here's why. Because tragedy will challenge everything. Even if but for a moment, will challenge everything you have ever believed about God. I'm telling you, when tragedy strikes, when you suffer a loss like ours or some other loss, I'm just being honest with you tonight, truths that you assumed that you stood firmly on. And I'm talking about simple truths like God is good and God is faithful and God cares for me. Again, if but for a moment, if just for a moment, I'm telling you, all of a sudden those things feel questionable. They do. But listen, if you've grounded your faith and belief in the Bible, though your whole world may change, the truth about God and who He is will not change. Amen. My friend, you listen to me tonight. That truth will be your anchor. That truth will be your firm foundation in the midst of the storm. Listen, your emotions are going to go up and down and sideways and every which way. And you're going to feel this way one moment, and you're going to feel that way another moment, and you're going to feel like something else another moment, and you're going to think this right now, but you're going to think this later and that tomorrow. And you're going to be all over the place. But let me tell you, there's one place we can come back to every time. And it's this book. It's this book. And it will always, are you listening? Always, always, always be the same. It doesn't change depending on how we feel. It's always the same. The truth of this book is always the same. So here's what that means tonight. God was good and faithful and caring the entire 35 years, 2 months, and 3 days before our son died. And I'm standing here tonight to tell you that He's still those same things today. Now, a little honesty and transparency here. I'm not saying that because I feel it. Because there are some days, brother, that I don't feel it. It's just not in here. But you know why I say those things? Because this book says it. And regardless of what I'm feeling at the moment, this book is still true. And by the way, the time to come to grips with what you believe about God and who He is is before tragedy strikes. You better, I'm just telling you, better get this stuff nailed down right now. And you better drive your stakes in this book right now. Because if you try to come to grips with these truths in the midst of suffering, we're Kansas folks, we'll understand this. That'd be like trying to build a tornado shelter in the middle of a tornado. It's a bit late. It'd be impossible to do. And trying to come to grips with all of this in the midst of suffering it's just not going to work. So let's talk about a fifth very important truth tonight, and it's this, and this is a big one. Normally, if anybody comments on this message, it's on the first point about not having to get over it. And it's this one, number 5, and it's simply this: it's okay to ask why. It's okay to ask why. Some have been led to believe, incorrectly in my opinion, that it's wrong to ask why. But I submit to you tonight that God is not put off by our questions. That's right. You say, well, Preacher, I don't, okay. Don't take my word for it. Let's take the Word's word for it, okay? Think with me. And I'm absolutely confident that I'm standing on good ground here tonight because I'm standing on biblical truth. Listen, David questioned God numerous times in the Psalms while seeking for answers. Matter of fact, I would encourage you to do this. I'd encourage you, if you want to follow up more in depth with what I'm saying right now, start in Psalm 1:1 and read all through the Psalms. And highlight or circle or mark or write down every time David had a question about God. David questioned God when he seemed to be distant. David questioned God when he felt forsaken by him. He questioned God when he felt like God had forgotten about him. This one always makes me chuckle. There was a time when David thought that maybe God had fallen asleep. And he questioned him. When he felt God was hiding from him, he questioned God about that. When he felt like injustice was going to be permitted to go on unpunished, he questioned God about that. And by the way, this same David who had all of these questions for God was later called a man after God's own heart. I think God and David were on good terms. Besides David, Moses questioned God in Numbers chapter 11, as did Habakkuk in chapter 1, and Job in chapter 7. Going to the New Testament, the disciples in John chapter 9. And if none of that is good enough, then go with me in your minds to Matthew chapter 27. There's Jesus. He's hanging on a cross, and out of the midst of the darkness, he cries, questions, my God, help me, church. Why? What? Why? That's Jesus. He's asking God, what? Why? Why have you forsaken me? So if David and Habakkuk and Moses and Job and the disciples aren't good enough, then I think we're standing on pretty solid ground if Jesus himself at one point said, God, why? It's okay to ask God why. To quote John Kitchen again, I quoted him this morning. He said this: why is the first and greatest word of the suffering soul. Our why questions allow us to go before our Heavenly Father and pour out our heart to Him. In Psalm 142, the psalmist said, I poured out my complaint before the Lord. My wife has done a lot of study on the subject of lament. And there is a lot of lament in the Psalms where there's no understanding, there's no ability to really comprehend why these things are happening. But that being said, let me say this tonight. There is I believe there is a danger in a persistent, ongoing focus on why. Because the longer our question goes unanswered, the more it feeds a sense of entitlement. And as that sense of entitlement grows, it usually leads to bitterness. As you can imagine, the subject of bitterness is a whole sermon in itself. But let me just offer you a couple of thoughts here real quick about how to keep from getting bitter. Number one, accept what cannot be changed. Our son is gone. TJ is not with us. And as much as we hate that, and as much as our hearts ache, that's the truth. That's the fact. The second thought I'd offer you, and this is so important, don't lose sight of what's left by focusing solely on what was lost. You know, preacher, for the longest time, I never understood how a tragedy like ours could tear a family apart. How it could cause so much turmoil and so much disagreement and even hatred and just vitriol among a family. To me, something like that ought to be drawing a family together. We ought to be loving on each other. We ought to be closer than we've ever been. And I never understood that. But now, I do understand that. Now listen, it has not happened in our family. If I'm lying, I'm dying. We have been fine. We have had none of that in our family. But I can see now how that could happen. I could easily see if Katie and I allowed ourselves to be so focused on our loss that we ignored the fact that TJ had a brother and a sister and they all have kids. I could see how they could become bitter and angry and upset with us and even become resentful of their brother's death because it's stolen their mom and dad from them. Does that make sense? It's stolen their kids, Grammy and Pawpaw. And so we have been very intentional about making sure that Tyler and Tiffany and their kids get as much of our time and as attention as anybody else in our family. Does that make sense? But I'm telling you, it's easy to do. And I can see how that can happen in a family. So if you want to keep from getting bitter, focus focus more on what you have left than you do on what was lost. Now please listen. That's not to say that you forget your friend or you forget your loved one. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. In our case, we're not moving on from TJ. We're moving on with him. I mean, we haven't forgotten about him. He's all over our house. You can't forget about that boy. We haven't taken out any pictures. We haven't done any of that. We want him in our life. And we love having him in our midst still. And we still will laugh and joke about, something will happen, and we'll just chuckle, and it will remind us of TJ and something silly that he said or something silly that he did. You see, getting through is about reliving the good memories and refusing to let the painful ones drag us down. Sometimes we can let our painful memories so dominate our minds and our viewpoints that our good memories all but disappear as they get tucked away in some dark corner of our minds. So no, this is not about forgetting our son. Again, it's about choosing not to let his death consume us. Because we still got our daughter and son-in-law and their 3 boys, and our son or our daughter and son-in-law and their 3 boys, our son, his wife, and their son, and our daughter-in-law. She's still our daughter-in-law. And those 3 beautiful girls are still our TJ's babies. And we love them with all our hearts. And we are so thankful. We are so thankful that Sheena still wants us to be a part of their lives. Her words to us were these: You are the biggest part of TJ that these girls have in their life. And we are so thankful for that. Here's the final truth that I'll share with you, and it's simply this. And it's not last because it's least by any means, but it's probably last because it's the greatest. And that is this truth: God's grace is sufficient. The pain of losing our son was greater than anything I could even begin to describe. But the help we have received from the Lord, and I mean this, is greater than I could even begin to explain. God said to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for thee." I love the word sufficient. You know why? Because it means enough. You don't have to dig real deep into the Greek and all that other stuff to understand what sufficient means. It simply means enough. Always and forever enough. Listen to me tonight. You could more easily dip a sponge into the Atlantic or the Pacific and soak up all of the water than you could exhaust God's supply of grace. You could wake up in the morning and walk out on your porch with a straw in your mouth and suck all of the oxygen out of the atmosphere. It'd be easier to do that than it would be to exhaust God's supply of grace. 'Tis grace hath brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. When John Newton penned this promise, he did so out of personal experience. His greatest test came the day that he buried his wife, Mary. He loved her dearly and had prayed that his death would precede hers. But his prayer was not answered. On the day that Mary Newton died, John Newton found strength to preach a Sunday sermon. The next day he visited church members, and later that afternoon he officiated at his wife's funeral. He grieved, yes, but in his grief he found God's provision. God still had enough grace for John Newton. He later went on to write this. Listen, he said, "The Bank of England is too poor to compensate for such a loss as mine. But the Lord, the all-sufficient God, speaks, and it is done. Let those who know Him and trust Him be of good courage. He can give them strength according to their day. He can increase their strength as their trials increase. And what He can do, He has promised that He will do." Thank God for His all-sufficient, truly amazing grace. Many have attempted to define grace, and no doubt you've heard many of those definitions, and you've read many of those definitions, some of them in acrostic form and what have you. But I've always liked this definition of grace. It's the one that just really resonates with me, and I can wrap my mind around. And it's this: God's grace is His supply for my every need when I need it. Let me say that again. Grace is God's supply for my every need when I need it. Peter writes of the manifold grace of God. The word manifold there meaning varied. For example, just as there are a variety of medicines to deal with a variety of illnesses, and just as there are a variety of tools to accomplish a variety of projects, there are various facets of God's grace to minister to the various needs that arise in our lives as believers. Now, maybe you've heard of God's grace for years, and you've heard people testify, as I have tonight and this morning, of God's grace and what it's done for them, and over here God's grace and what it's done for them, and how God's grace did this and how God's grace did that, and you've often thought to yourself, well, how do I tap into this grace thing? Man, that sounds awesome. I want to be a part of that. I want that. I need that. How do you tap into that? Well, the Bible tells us very clearly in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 16. "Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." You know how we tap into God's grace? Through prayer. We ask for it. That's the invitation. That's the context of Hebrews chapter 4. Let us come boldly, not arrogantly, not demandingly, but let us come with confidence. That's what that word means, confidence. Confidently. Let us come unto the throne of grace, knowing that He's a God of mercy. And knowing that He will give us grace to help in time of need. Because Christ fully understands our weaknesses, and because He has experienced our pain, when we need grace just to take another step, When we need grace just to live another day. When we need grace to cope with another memory. When we need grace just to get out from under the covers and to open the shades and to turn on the lights, we simply go to the Lord in prayer and ask for it. And church, He promises to give it to us. Aren't you thankful for God's grace tonight?